Hello, everyone, and welcome to your weekly news recap. We are your hosts, Jacob Smith,
and Matt Morgans,
here to break down some of the biggest and most interesting stories of the week in the gaming industry. And Matt, why don't you kick us off with some news about Starfield and Elder Scrolls?
Yes, so one of the more sort of interesting but also a bit disappointing stories to come out of the Elder Scrolls 25th anniversary was the news that neither Elder Scrolls 6 nor Starfield are actually going to be at E3 this year, which was something that Todd Howard said during a long live stream as part of the anniversary, which I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed about, because certainly after last year when Bethesda released teaser trailers for both, even though they didn't really reveal anything with those teaser trailers and they were clearly not gameplay footage or anything like that. It's going to be a bit of a blow, I'm sure, to people who are hoping that they were going to see Elder Scrolls 6 fairly soon, because if they're not going to show Starfield this year, that really suggests that it's going to be a late 2020 release date at the earliest.
Certainly a little deflating.
Yes, certainly. On the other hand, I think people would be happy to see Bethesda putting in more time to work on their projects and really make sure that they're as good as possible after what happened with Fallout 76. But, it's been 10 years or very close to it since they last released an Elder Scrolls game. Elder Scrolls Blades.
2011.
That's right. So
Skyrim.
We're getting up there with a 10-year mark, and we could very easily hit it before Elder Scrolls 6 releases.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's very possible. And I think that when they announced Elder Scrolls 6, the official announcement at last year's E3, it was huge, but most of us knew it wasn't happening anytime soon.
Certainly.
Granted, it was disappointing, but it was just kind of a recognizing what fans wanted. It's like, here, it's coming, don't worry, it's in development, we hear you.
Yes.
In essence, it's kind of what Blizzard should have done with Diablo 4, but that's beside the point. Basically, them just showing, hey, we've got it done. Same with Starfield, and I think their lack of presence at this E3 is encouraging, if only for the fact that they are pacing themselves, that they can recognize that they don't want to announce anything, unless it's ready to be announced.
Yes, hopefully they've learned the lessons of Fallout 76, where it felt very rushed and released ahead of schedule.
Certainly. But there's some more developments going on around 76, aren't there?
Yes, well, them not having Elder Scrolls 6 or Starfield at E3 kind of begs the question, what are they going to have at E3? And it certainly sounds like they're going to have a bit of a muted presence at E3 this year compared to the last year. But they do have some things to talk about, and I think the biggest thing there is going to be their Fallout 76 DLC roadmap for the second half of 2019. We're coming to the end now of Wild Appalachia, which is their first sort of 2.5-3 month DLC release schedules, which has released kind of a new content update every couple of weeks or so. So I think the next update is coming tomorrow, in fact. They're adding a new PvE dungeon. And they've so far added a fair amount of new content. Certainly the reaction from fans seems to have been fairly positive, especially since they put in so much work between launch and now to fixing all of the problems that they had with the game. But when they first announced Wild Appalachia, they also announced 2 additional kind of content release periods, which were going to be Nuclear Winter in summer and then Wastelanders in fall or autumn, if you're English. And so far they haven't really said much about what's going to be in Nuclear Winter or Wastelanders. All we know is that Nuclear Winter is going to introduce some kind of big new game mode, which is very interesting because they've said it's going to be an entirely new way to play the game. And thus far, as part of Wild Appalachia, they've released Survival Mode, which is an entirely different way to play the game. You can go into the menu and choose between Adventure Mode and Survival Mode. So Nuclear Winter sounds like it's going to be a third option. To
shake things up.
But given that it's being put as the headline feature, whereas Survival Mode was just one of the features in Wild Appalachia, it sounds like it could be a bit bigger.
Definitely, and I think, that's something that they're trying to do to revitalize 76. I think it's nice to see, at least on my end, someone who didn't really play the game, didn't get into it specifically because of critical reviews.
Yes.
I think it's nice to see them not abandoning it and trying to make it into something potentially like an Elder Scrolls Online, where it was kind of lukewarm, negative at first, and they can really build it into something special. I hope that's what they're trying to do.
Well, they have said that part of Nuclear Winter's release schedule is going to include high-level vault raids, which is definitely something that fans have been asking for, the kind of higher-end, higher-tier content. So hopefully that'll start to cater to those fans. And then we don't really know what's coming in Wastelanders. They've said it's going to include an entirely new main quest, but we really don't know anything about the scope of that and what it's actually going to include. So it does give them a lot of opportunity to talk about that upcoming content at E3. And if they're not going to be talking about Elder Scrolls 6 or Starfield, then this is really their big thing, unless they suddenly turn around and announce something that we've never heard of.
No, I don't think a new IP is on the way. Something tells me.
I think looking at the timings, they could also do... Because I recall last year, Todd Howard came out and said that they'd wanted to release Elder Scrolls Blades at E3, like they did with Fallout Shelter, but that the game just wasn't ready. Now that the game is actually out in early access, it does strike me that they could kind of mirror the release by bringing the game into, or out of early access and into the kind of full version at E3, if they wanted to have a big announcement that fans would probably be excited for.
Yeah, I definitely think that would be a power move, and I hope they don't pull the trigger too early like they did on 76.
Yes,
but it's thinking on pulling the trigger too early and jumping the gun. It seems that Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot has done everything he can to avoid Ubisoft doing that exact thing when it comes to Splinter Cell, because he recently stated that they understand, they hear fans' wishes for a new Splinter Cell, but that they don't really want to disappoint. They don't want to disappoint fans by releasing something that's subpar, which is an interesting thing to hear from a major publisher, them addressing that they hear fans' concerns, and yet that they aren't ready to release something regarding Splinter Cell. What do you make of that?
I think for someone who's in the position of sort of like the Ubisoft CEO, he's kind of going to be caught between two factors, which is keeping the fans happy and actually making games that are going to turn a significant profit. And unfortunately, the current sort of money-making model, which is primarily the games as a service model, is not necessarily compatible with some of the titles which have existed for a long time, because the format of the games as a service model doesn't necessarily mesh well with the format of some of the older titles, and I think Splinter Cell does fall into that category.
Yeah, certainly, and I think they've shown that they can bring franchises back, really refresh them in new, big, exciting ways with things like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, expanding on the things that they did in Origins, really breathing new life into the franchise.
Absolutely.
But they've also been burned trying to do that with things like Ghost Recon Wildlands. It wasn't very well received commercially, critically, and so I think to me it sounds like they're really afraid to take risks, especially like you said in this new era of gaming, in which big publishers are way more incentivized to go after these games as a service type models.
Yeah. I think they've already got a fairly diverse kind of franchise catalogue, and games like The Division and Watch Dogs kind of suit a bit better the games as a service model. They both have open worlds, they both have the kind of same quest system, the kind of light RPG mechanics. Whereas I feel like if you were to introduce those mechanics to Splinter Cell, people would be disappointed. And that might be exactly what the Ubisoft CEO is talking about, that he recognises that what fans want from the Splinter Cell series isn't necessarily what would actually kind of make money from a larger audience.
Yeah, and I mean, it worked with Hitman in a sense that they released it episodically, but that didn't feel as games as a service. It felt like it was purposefully episodic, and I don't think that was necessarily to accommodate this new era of gaming. I just think that's how they wanted to release Hitman. But I think them addressing, I think their CEO, Ubisoft CEO, addressing the fact that they hear fans is big, because like I said, you don't really hear big publishers saying, yeah, we hear you. They kind of just work in the shadows for the most part, especially with their most valuable, most cherished IPs.
Yes.
You don't see Take-Two really going off and letting Rockstar say whatever they want about the next GTA, because they all want to keep it under wraps. And I think that it speaks volumes as to the level of fan engagement that Ubisoft wants to strike. Maybe they want to really improve fan relations after significant flops like Unity, like Wildlands, things that weren't as well received, and make it clear that they do hear fans. But nonetheless, it's disappointing that we won't really see or hear much about Splinter Cell anytime soon, despite the fact that Jade Raymond said that there was something in the works. Before she left Ubisoft, she had stated that, yes, there was something in the works regarding Splinter Cell, but with her not really attached to Ubisoft anymore, being attached to Google Stadia.
It could be that it was a fairly early prototype or something of that
Certainly.
sort.
It could have even been just a board meeting. I mean, we really don't know. They could have had put nothing down on paper. It could have just been talks. And unfortunately, it looks like those talks have led to the Splinter Cell flame being snuffed out for now. But things that are, keeping the ball rolling, keeping things fresh and new and exciting. Epic Games has kind of tried to emulate what Apex Legends is doing recently. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, they've announced a new, I think it's called the Reboot Van. It's essentially, and stop me if you've heard this before, but a point on the map where you can take something which you've recovered from the body of a fallen ally, and you can put it into this site, and it will bring them back with no gear. I'm sure that's never been done before.
No, completely original.
It's certainly it's in keeping with Fortnite. Fortnite does have a bit of a history of sort of very brazenly taking things that aren't necessarily their original ideas and just incorporating them into the game. And I think it's a very clear indication that Epic is wary of Apex Legends and is kind of adapting one of the things which sets Apex Legends apart as a more unique battle royale.
And certainly generating the numbers for them to be wary, to warrant that type of behavior.
I think not since PUBG have they really had a serious competitor, and this is the first game that's really kind of punched through to the top, and very, very quickly. So it still remains to be seen whether Apex is going to have the long-term sustainability that Fortnite has had. Some of the numbers lately have shown that the game might be subsiding a bit, which is sort of to be expected after the initial surge.
Certainly, yeah.
So it's still too early to say really whether the game is going to continue to last against Fortnite. I think indications are that it probably won't suddenly collapse at the very least. But it's interesting to see that Epic is very clearly trying to adapt something and sort of close the distance between the two of them, take away something that might attract players to a different gaming experience with Apex, with that respawn mechanic.
Certainly, and I think, in a sense, it's encouraging to see for fans of Fortnite and for Epic Games who want to see the game continue on as strong as it has been, which, needless to say, is ridiculously strong, because I think it shows that they are willing to innovate and do so very blatantly. Like, they're not going to sit behind the scenes and say, oh, this is a good idea, I wish we could implement it into our game. They're going to say, oh, this is a good idea, we're going to implement this into our game. And Fortnite is no stranger to stealing things, taking things, borrowing things. I mean, it doesn't really give them back, but taking things from
borrowing
from
in
other games.
Commas.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that it's encouraging, at the very least, for people who want to see Fortnite, keep growing, to see that Epic Games is that adaptable, is that flexible, and is willing to bring their game into new light and bring it some fresh ideas. Certainly.
It's also interesting to see in the same week that we had that news, not as concrete news, but Respawn came out and sort of made a statement when asked about whether there would be a Nintendo Switch port for Apex. Sort of not saying no, as it were. It sounds like it's really too early for them to confirm, but they did say that they weren't going to rule the possibility out, which is to me the developer way of saying it's either in the works or it's planned to be in the works. But
seeing if they can work it out.
But they don't want to say anything too early. In fact, just a few days before that announcement was made, a developer online from Respawn said one of the reasons why Respawn often doesn't sort of talk about upcoming new features well ahead of schedule is because they're still kind of working on these ideas and they're not sure what's going to come to the game and in what form and when.
And I respect that.
Yes, I think it makes sense. If they announce some feature and then 2 weeks later they have to rework it, and it ends up being completely different. We've certainly seen plenty of instances of fans being unhappy because a game that's been shown off at E3 or something like that has then had a big kind of development overhaul in the months after, and so things that were shown in gameplay or it was talked about in interviews just disappear. So I think Respawn's wise to kind of adopt that policy of being fairly tight-lipped, but it's also interesting to see that they're kind of willing to go into other markets, and that's exactly what I think has kept Fortnite successful, is kind of spreading itself across every market that it can get onto.
I mean, mobile, Switch,
Exactly.
cross-platform.
Exactly.
It's pioneered a lot of new methods of play in the modern day.
Yes. So I don't know if we'll see Apex go to mobile. I think it's theoretically possible, but probably more of a long-term thing.
Yeah, I think if we'd seen Apex go to mobile, we would have seen EA try to do that with other things in the past. I don't think that's necessarily the market they're trying to corner. Granted,
Not necessarily.
Yeah, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility, but I think Switch is much more likely, considering the fact that if they want to bring the game to all cross-platform play,
Yes.
that would be the next step. And I agree, if they want to keep up with Fortnite, if they want to compete Fortnite and beat Fortnite in aspects, then that is exactly what they're going to have to do. Important that they stay tight-lipped about it, of course. I think Vince Zampella does a really good job of pacing the announcements. I mean, this dude has never made a bad game. I think it's not that brazen of a statement to make. He knows what he's doing, and EA knows that Respawn knows what they're doing. They gave them a lot of autonomy with Apex now, and I think if they can make it work, if Nintendo is willing to bring Apex to the Switch, that EA will absolutely let that happen if that's something that Respawn does want to make happen.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. It'd just be a smart move in all aspects.
I think there's definitely a market for Apex on the Switch. It'll probably be a matter of whether Respawn actually handles the Switch port themselves, or whether they contract a third-party studio or another studio that's owned by EA to work on the ports themselves. Certainly there are a few studios where basically all they do is just port things to the Switch.
Yeah, I could see, but I could see Respawn wanting to handle that in-house, especially given their affinity for really perfecting their first-person shooters. I can understand if they either wanted to do it in-house by themselves or didn't end up doing it because they couldn't handle it in-house. I wouldn't be surprised if that, because I don't think that's a push that EA is really trying to make. Again, I think that if Respawn showed initiative and showed interest in wanting to do that, EA would let it happen. But I don't think EA is saying, do this or we're going to give it to someone else.
No,
it doesn't feel like that's a sense of urgency surrounding this. Granted, we don't really know a whole ton, but that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And speaking of not really knowing a lot about things, there's of course more Cyberpunk 2077 news, more CD Projekt Red news.
Yes,
not a whole lot, but it's something, and that's like all fans have been nibbling on. It's just breadcrumbs keeping us sustained until E3. According to Smart Recruiter, CD Projekt Red is hiring a release manager for Cyberpunk 2077, and this is just a public posting on their website. You can go check it out right now. But to me, this is another indicator among several that this means something big for E3. and for
Yes, I mean
Cyberpunk.
they've certainly said that E3 is going to be their biggest, or this E3 is going to be their biggest E3 appearance ever, which I think is pretty likely given their appearance last year, where they really
Hmm.
didn't show off a whole lot, and they still managed to dominate the event.
Yeah, yeah.
I think if they show up with actual like gameplay trailers and things like that, people are going to be very very excited.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's Cyberpunk or not. The CD
and
Projekt Red's kind of forte is dropping little bits of news and people going
yes,
absolutely crazy for it.
yes.
They don't need to do anything out of the huge, just to
We're
generate
we're
excitement.
definitely seeing them kind of doing bits of logistical setup. Like they just
Hmm.
recently announced that they're going to set up an official CD Projekt Red merch store, which in and of itself is not a huge piece of news, but in the context of this happening ahead of E3 2019, I think we're pretty likely to see them actually start selling, Cyberpunk 2077 merch right before the event, because as soon as they have E3, there's going to be a spike in people searching for that sort of thing, and it's
Absolutely.
a clear moment to start capitalizing on it. Um, and it's all kind of furthering that Cyberpunk 2077 hype towards what's presumably going to be a release date in the very latter end of 2019 or early 2020, most likely.
Yeah, that's what
Um,
it's shaping up to be, looking to be anyway.
yes, I think
And I think
the analysis that was done by that Polish um, analytics firm, I forget exactly
mhm.
when it was, but they came out and said Q4 2019, which makes it fall into that latter 2019, early 2020 bracket.
Well, and I think we're talking about, a company, a development studio who really knows how to announce things at the perfect pace. And they wouldn't announce that this E3 is going to be huge. They wouldn't be setting up all
No,
these
that's
things
true.
like hiring the release manager, like setting up the merch store, unless they were really gearing up to get something out now, recent,
Yes.
soon. And I think that they wouldn't drum up all this hype and say, okay, it's coming mid to late 2020. Like, I think at
Yes.
the latest, at this point,
Hopefully
given
not.
what we know and given what we've heard, early 2020, but most likely a late 2019 release, especially following E3.
Yes, yeah.
But I think, that again indicates that CD Projekt Red really knows what they're doing, and it's nice to see such a big, successful development studio retain their publishing rights and be able to announce things as they want to, as they see fit.
Yes, it
Because
helps, I think, them being a cohesive
mhm.
studio publisher pairing rather than an independent studio that's been bought by a separate publisher.
Certainly, and we've seen success under that model, and I don't want to knock studios that find success under large publishers or who
No,
find success
certainly
after
not.
being bought by large publishers, but it is indicative of the fact that CD Projekt Red is not only a good developer, they are a good publisher.
Yes.
Because they've announced the game is playable start to finish, and they've been spending the last year and a half on polish. That is it, which to me is so indicative of the fact that they don't want to announce the game and then delay it.
Well,
Which
there's some rumors that they might be maybe working on multiplayer.
Mhm.
They have said some stuff about multiplayer, and I think they hired some people related to multiplayer. Um, it's unknown though whether this is going to be a big thing in Cyberpunk 2077 or whether it's just going to be something that's kind of tacked on. And it's also possible that all the multiplayer stuff that they've talked about isn't actually for Cyberpunk 2077. It could be that it's for this unannounced secret project that they're going
Our
to release by
mystery 2021 release, yeah.
Yeah. So I think they had some job listings that specifically referred to kind of online multiplayer framework and servers and things like that. So the suspicion was that they might do something for Cyberpunk that was multiplayer, but maybe post-launch, that they just haven't announced. So who knows? We may see something of that sort at E3. If they do something with multiplayer, I'd expect it to be entirely separate from the single player.
Yeah, certainly.
At the very most, we might see something a bit like what Rockstar has done with GTA Online, where they kind of set a separate instance of the city aside. But I could also see it being just like a PvP mode.
Yeah.
without going into crazy open world territory.
Mm-hmm. I think whatever it is, it will be finely polished. It will fit perfectly into the game, and if it doesn't, I'm sure that CD Projekt Red would have scrapped it. I think that any additional features that they're working on, they know it's what their fans want, and their company description is pretty indicative of the fact that they know exactly what fans want. It reads, our mission is this. We want to deliver bleeding-edge, mature role-playing games with a deep focus on storytelling, and we want to wrap them in an honest, good value-for-money package gamers find worth their hard-earned cash. We love all games and gamers to be treated like that, and we're working hard every day to make that happen. If that doesn't sound like your best friend, developer, publisher, I don't know what is. And it kind of nicely ties into the recent announcement surrounding Star Wars: The Fallen Order.
Absolutely.
And what EA is doing. So around that game, it's coming out this November 15th, which is really exciting for people who are looking forward to this game, have a firm release date, have a trailer, and the story is cool. We've known it's cool. It's set after Order 66, a Padawan in hiding who's escaped the Order execution during the Order, named Cal. He's on the run. He's trying to suppress his force powers and stay low-key under the radar of the Empire, but that isn't what I want to talk about. What I really want to focus on is Vince Zampella of Respawn confirmed in an interview with IGN at the Star Wars Celebration that there will be no multiplayer or microtransactions, period.
I think to almost universal approval from fans.
Applause, tears of joy. I mean, EA corroborated this, and people lost their minds all over again.
Yeah.
This is unprecedented, and people are really excited because this is what we've been wanting since. I don't know, when was the last good single-player Star Wars game? I think everyone's pretty hard-pressed to remember. Yeah. I know. I mean, you could argue that Force Unleashed was a fun action title. I mean, recognize its problems, but it was a fun title that, again, didn't have a forced multiplayer component. Granted, the sequel really fumbled things, but I think since then we haven't really seen a standalone single-player Star Wars game.
No, I think what we've mainly seen
find success.
Is Star Wars games getting cancelled.
Yeah, left and right
on more than a few occasions. Which, I think to some extent, some of those projects were very early in development, and we maybe only heard about them because of the Star Wars name. There's probably a lot of games that get to that stage in development and get cancelled that you'd never hear about because it doesn't have a big name like that. So I don't think it necessarily deserves the negative press that's surrounded EA on that topic. Certainly in some cases, I think it's deserved. But we do finally have yes, certainly. But we do finally have a single player Star Wars game, and I think that there's probably a direct tie to last year seeing the major success of God of War.
Yeah, I think that definitely set a precedent for a single player in the industry.
Yes, I think it kind of showed developers and, more importantly, publishers that there was a major market for, really well-written, narrative-driven single player. God of War kind of blew all the sales records out of the water for a PlayStation exclusive and for the series itself. And, I remember writing in articles at the time that I thought this was going to be a sea change for the industry, and, a year from now we're going to start getting some big single-player announcements, and lo and behold, it's been a little over a year, and we are starting to get some big single-player announcements.
I mean, you look right into your crystal ball for that one. That is pretty spot on. It seems like that's what the shift in the industry is indicating.
Yes, well, it's not entirely unexpected. Whenever a big game that's a bit different from what has come before it in the last few years for the market comes along and kind of smashes records like that, you can pretty much guarantee that developers and publishers are going to kind of not copy the game, but kind of copy the format a bit because they think it's an opportunity for them to make money.
Absolutely.
Back when everyone was making MOBAs, and then more recently everyone made Battle Royales, and now I think we're going to start to see more single player, which, as a single player fan, I'm more than more than a little happy about.
Absolutely, I'm thrilled. Well, and I've always preferred single player games, single player story driven,
Ditto.
games that offer great gameplay, great story without having to nickel and dime you for money or having to make you feel like you're missing out on this giant multiplayer component. What I think is interesting though, isn't that some publisher, some developer is making this happen. Is that it's EA making this happen, which is. EA and Activision are the poster children in the gaming industry for, I think, money grubbing, for using games as a service, for trying to implement those things. So I think it's interesting that they are allowing this. Could it really be them, an indication of them understanding what fans want, what they are creating?
I think they are starting to learn that people don't necessarily like the way they've been doing things. And although I think there is a place in the market for the sort of AAA microtransaction heavy stuff, we have seen some games come out like that and be perfectly successful.
Of course.
There's plenty of gamers who would much rather have a single player story, or even a multiplayer game, kind of divorced from those mechanics. And I think the experience of Battlefront 2 really sort of taught EA a lesson about how people felt about things like loot boxes.
Yeah.
And you can look at what they've done more recently with Battlefield 5, and certainly what they've done there with microtransactions has been a lot more positive than what they did with Battlefront. And I don't think that's necessarily gotten as much coverage as it deserves. Because they didn't introduce... They only recently introduced microtransaction currency, like 4 or 5 months after the game came out, and even now it's purely cosmetic. There's no pay to win at all.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good indication that somebody at EA has kind of figured things out.
Yeah.
And I think also there's a more clearer precedent for not including loot boxes or microtransactions in single player. I think the only times those have happened, they've generally been met with very poor reactions from fans. I recall, I think it was Shadow of War came out with microtransactions for single player, and people were not happy.
Yes, with a hefty amount.
Even though it's obviously purely optional, but just the implication that the game was kind of built to be more grindy than it might otherwise have been, to incentivize people to buy microtransactions, which
absolutely,
nobody really wants that.
Yeah, and I'm always skeptical when news like this comes out about EA. I can't really honestly get just the unbridled excitement for any EA titles anymore, just because I'm worried that something they're going to do is going to sully this experience. And granted,
I know what you
this
mean.
announcement, right, a single player game, being developed by Respawn Entertainment with no multiplayer and no microtransactions, is exactly what we wanted from our Star Wars titles. And who knows, maybe they really are realizing that, hey, this Disney property is a huge cash cow if we let it be, if we give fans the games they want. But something in the back of my mind will never let me be truly, truly excited.
Yeah, they do have a little way to go to, I think, win people's faith back.
Absolutely. I think that's, at least true for me personally. And granted, the excitement around this announcement is palpable. But I can't help but feel like EA might be up to something else. So who knows? Maybe that's just my past trauma speaking.
I'm sure we'll see more at E3. And, if they've got any hidden announcements, then they'll no doubt come out then. Although so far, I think it's looking very hopeful that this will be a standalone, single player only, no microtransaction thing. And they've come out and said that there won't be, so fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, toes crossed, everything. We're looking forward to E3, certainly, because EA is, they've indicated that it's going to be a bit of a smaller E3 for them, just like with a lot of other people like Sony, but I think they still are going to have something to say about the fall in order to try to generate hype for November. Sure. Yeah,
I'm sure.
But that's going to do it for us this week. Thank you so much for tuning in today. You can find these stories and more at VGR.com. All links will be in the description and show notes. Once again, I'm Jacob Smith.
And I'm Matt Morgans.
And we will see you next week.